Hey there, welcome to Trinity Place. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is a sermon for the 15th week of Pentecost. And as our readings indicate, Jeremiah is grieving and Jesus is taking no prisoners. And I'm not preaching on either one of them, actually. It's not just because I'm a little bit weary of the very hard work involved in finding where 21st century or 2,500-year-old texts intersect with 21st century lives, but more because Wendell Berry, in that wonderful reading, has evoked in me a strange murmuring. Perhaps it is anticipating the coolness of autumn's breath and the whisperings in the change of seasons. But whatever it is, I invite us to get quieter, get softer, get more thoughtful. When despair grows in us, as Berry writes, let's be clear. Even the most optimistic among us, myself one of them, will find our gaze pulled into a stare that stops like a becalmed sail in a pool of despondence from time to time. And, as Berry continues, and when we wake in the middle of the night, at the least sound and fear of what our lives and our children's lives may be, because the truth is, the door in front of us, upon which our hand is turning the knob, is a door to the unknown. The sheer mystery of tomorrow, for ourselves and perhaps even more so for our children and grandchildren, can feel unnerving, unsettling, frightening even. And as he continues, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water. Still water. Because for reasons unclear, water is soothing, is calming, is magically healing. Even when the waves rise up from the fierceness of wind and the darkness below rumbles sheer and uncontrolled power, we continue to find stillness in the presence of water. Azure blue Lake Ontario, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump due north. The St. Lawrence Seaway, just a morning stretch northeast. And here, everywhere we step, in our own backyards here in the Finger Lakes, a lake or waterfall or gorge with a laughing stream, we know, at least here, as in many places that have water, the still presence of water, the stillness and the presence of water. And for those who lack water, perhaps even more so. And as Berry continues, and we feel above us the day-blind stars waiting for their light, for a time we rest in the grace of the world and are free. The peace of wild things. The day-blind stars, light hidden behind light, the presence of which we know even as it goes unseen. The sky above in its fullness, as both light and dark layer one another, overpowers us with our own smallness. And in that moment of utter insignificance, we can feel free. Now, you all know by now, if you've listened to me or read any of my writings, that I walk my dog down at the lake each morning. And once she's done with her business, and I don't really know why we call it business, which we sit together on a bench. I sit there to contemplate. She sits there to get her belly rubbed. We do it often even in the rain, frequently in the snow, as well as in gorgeous mornings when the sun pours down upon us. Now, our lake happens to be big by many standards, but taking a step back, it's still nestled as if in cupped hands by the rise of small hills, wooded land, and a vineyard or two. The lake changes color with light, and whether the sandy bottom is brushed smooth by the waves or murky from swallowing a season of weeds and leaves and branches and algae, the sun can be reflected back to itself as if the water were glass, or it can ripple like diamonds on choppy waves, or it can be dark steel with white teeth. One morning this past summer, seems like a while ago now, but not so long, I took, excuse me, my 3.5-year-old grandson Declan fishing on the small docks across from the wine ice cream place near here. It had been very hot, in the 90s for several days, and I doubted that we would catch anything because of that. But I had 5 different snacks with me to dole out every so often just to keep Declan's attention. One of them, the first one that we dug into, was organic gummy worms. We joked that we were eating more worms than the fish were. But then suddenly, about 20 or 30 feet away, the miraculous body of a fish separated the still water as it jumped fully into the air and glimmered in the sun. It leaped through gravity the same way it slips and wiggles down through water. Declan was eating a handful of colored goldfish crackers. Yes, the snacks did have a theme going. I don't think Declan noticed the fish or would even have been interested in it perhaps, unless of course it was pulling on the line from beneath the water. I, however, turned at that moment my thoughts inward into a bulging metaphor. It's a metaphor I've learned that I have leaned on more than once, but I will lean on it again because it's the most clear and present truth I know. It's a spiritual truth, a holy wisdom, which is that the mirrored glass on the surface of the lake is like a human face. And I thought that to myself, that beneath this glass is concealing an entire civilization we do not see. I began to think through the names of the lake's citizens I knew anything about. Fish, water bugs, turtle, snakes, tadpoles, frogs, leeches, mosquito larvae. And then my thoughts kind of hovered over the universe of even smaller things I know almost nothing about. Molecules, bacteria, parasites, all the invisible creepy crawly things that make and disturb the muck down below. I wanted to grab Declan's attention. I wanted to tell him about what I was thinking, about how there is a universe of life that we cannot see that lies below the surface. I wanted to tell him about how the lake is an ecosystem, not just the water that he sees, but that its health, its very health and vibrancy is wrapped up in this vast matrix of relationships far beyond the obvious ones that we see on the surface. I wanted to tell him that such an ecosystem is my best metaphor for God. And that in that very moment where we sat there, blue, gold, red, and green goldfish crackers in his tiny little hand, that he was part of it too, a tiny part of a vast, holy ecosystem. Now, such metaphors, such thoughts are fruit for contemplation. It is, for me anyway, the voice that speaks when we enter into the peace of wild things. But as much as I enjoy it, and even though it's a nearly everyday exercise on some level for me on my bench with Rabia at Lakeside, I think we really do need to give ourselves permission to lower ourselves down into the presence of still water, where we can rest in the grace of the world. I think we need to say out loud that contemplation is valuable. It's worth something. And it's more than a luxury. It's life-giving even. Now the colors will begin to change soon. And indeed, some leaves have already made ready to fall on the ground. The water in the lake is in motion, turning itself over from below to above, and we are entering a season ripe for contemplation. So that's my really very simple invitation today, to give yourself an opportunity and the will to contemplate. It need not be on nature. It could be a verse, a book, a painting, an event, a prayer even. But give yourself time. Give yourself opportunity. Give yourself will to contemplate. I know this is not the red meat I often bite off from readings like the ones that we heard in Luke and Jeremiah today. But here's a little secret about that parable from Luke. It's better approached as a Zen koan than a fable or a moral. A koan, remember, is a tool in some Buddhist traditions employed by the master for the teaching of a disciple. It's a simile, a parable, a metaphor even, so extremely paradoxical and even non-rational that on the face of it, it seems like nonsense. So the student is left then to contemplate upon the meaning of the koan, or more aptly, upon what the non-answer of the nonsense might be. The most famous koan, a cliche these days, is attributed to a 17th century Japanese master who asked the question, 2 hands clap and there's a sound. What is the sound of 1 hand? Or this one that I like a lot. A disciple once asked Master Yun Men, if not even one thought has arisen in the mind, is there still a sin? Yun Men answered, Matsumaru! I am not saying that this first century illiterate Galilean peasant like Jesus knew anything about Buddhist koans. But whatever that original story was from Luke today, the one we heard in this gospel, it feels to me like a nonsensical koan. If you want to know how to make sense out of Luke's version of Jesus' story, I suggest you take it home and cogitate on it, chew on it, put it on the counter in the kitchen and come back to it again and again. Contemplate. Don't rest easy with any answer that you come up with, and instead keep wondering. Contemplate upon the disreputable manager and how we too are to be like him or her. In other words, practice contemplation. And it's an important spiritual tool that all of us could develop and employ far more than we do. Contemplation is the counter practice to juggling multiple tasks while running in place. In other words, it's the perfect antidote to multitasking, which can strip us bare of our creativity and our peace. Contemplation Contemplation is the act of concentration. It requires us to focus all of our immediate attention on one thing. In particular, one spiritual thing. And by spiritual, I am speaking very broadly, as in a large needle-nosed fish Rabia and I watched dance above the water for just a split second the morning that I wrote this sermon. That thing that we focus on, and broadly speaking, that spiritual thing, could be a question or an attribute of God, could be the wood drake and the great blue heron, or the grace evoked by the presence of still water. Contemplation, which is bringing oneself fully into the moment with the thing that's being contemplated, may in fact take place across time as we come back to the same contemplation day after day or month after month or year after year, to a specific place even. But I want to be clear that simple contemplation upon a spiritual question or attribute is subversive. It will begin to corrode our other assumptions and our other answers long before it ever supplies new ones. What Wendell Berry proposes in his small poem is dangerous because true contemplation is subversive. It troubles the waters of the soul. It stirs things up. It moves the stagnant pond within the mind, and the long-held beliefs and answers get agitated. A prolonged contemplation will stir up the cloud of lazy answers that have been allowed to settle for years, perhaps. So as peaceful as it can feel in the moment, contemplation troubles the waters of the mind when we allow ourselves to settle in it deeply. And even though we are practicing stillness, as we increase the concentration of our awareness, the longer-term effect will be subversive. So that's it. A simple exercise I'm commending to you: contemplation. Allow the sacred stories, the contemporary poems, the wood drake and the heron, the presence of still water, to penetrate our thoughts as we concentrate our mind upon the holy, even the ordinary holy that is hiding in plain sight right here in front of us. Peace to you. Thanks for being here.